Help, she can't breathe, he roared, lungs burning. The old woman's weight a crushing burden. 90 seconds. That's all it took. 90 seconds to choose between a dying stranger and the interview that could save his daughter. Heaving, he felt her go limp. Damn it. They think he's a hero. They see a dead-end dad throwing away his last shot. But that wheezing woman, she saw something else entirely. A flicker of the man her daughter needed. They have no idea how his quiet kindness will change everything. He'd saved her life. Now he'd just lost his. Help! She can't breathe! He roared, lungs burning, the old woman's weight a crushing burden. 90 seconds. That's all it took. 90 seconds to choose between a dying stranger and the interview that could save his daughter. Heaving, he felt her go limp. Damn it. They think he's a hero. They see a dead-end dad throwing away his last shot. But that wheezing woman, she saw something else entirely. A flicker of the man her daughter needed. They have no idea how his quiet kindness will change everything. He'd saved her life. Now he'd just lost his. The brick bit at his dress shoes as he ran, each impact sending a jolt up his spine. The borrowed tie, a shade of blue he'd never normally wear, flapped against his cheek, a constant, irritating reminder of the charade he was trying to pull off. The image of a man capable, successful, worthy of a second chance. Ethan Powell, Logistics Coordinator, 9:30 a.m., Horizon Innovations. $68,000 a year. Healthcare, security, a future for Abby. All of it, with every ragged breath, receding into the distance. He shifted the woman's weight. Her breath rattled against his ear, a wet, desperate sound that triggered a cold dread in his gut. Each inhale a monumental effort, each exhale a defeated sigh. He risked a glance at the digital clock on the First National Bank building. 9:17. 13 minutes. The interview, 6 blocks away, was evaporating. Hold on, he gasped, the words torn from his throat. Just hold on. He'd been sprinting for what felt like an eternity, weaving through the morning commuters. Most stared, their faces a mixture of concern and annoyance. One man actually chuckled. Ethan ignored them, his vision tunneling, focused solely on the red brick of the Oregon Medical Center, a distant beacon in his personal apocalypse. 7 months. 7 months of scraping by, of ramen dinners and eviction notices, of broken promises and Abby's ever-present, unspoken needs. This interview was supposed to be the turning point, the chance to finally give his daughter the life she deserved. He remembered her bright smile that morning as he'd wrestled with the borrowed tie. "You look so handsome, Dad. Is today special?" The question, innocent and hopeful, now felt like a brand on his skin. He stumbled, nearly losing his balance. The woman's grip on his shirt collar tightened, a desperate clawing that sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through his veins. He could feel her fading, her weight becoming deadened in his arms. "No!" he roared, the sound primal and desperate. "Don't you dare give up!" Fragments of the morning flashed through his mind. Abby's eager question about the science museum, a trip they couldn't afford. "Will we be able to go, Dad?" she'd asked, her eyes wide with expectation. "After today," he'd promised, "everything's going to be okay." Liar. He poured every ounce of his remaining energy into his legs, ignoring the burning in his lungs, the throbbing in his head. He had to get her there. He had to. He saw her face. Rachel, his late wife. The last time they had seen each other. He had heard of it, that the last moments before death are the most beautiful and most terrifying thing to ever behold. He would never forget it. It was a race against time, a battle against his own exhaustion. But no matter how tired he was, he had to make it. It didn't matter if he lost everything he had. He wouldn't watch another person die again. The automatic doors of the emergency room slid open, and Ethan stumbled inside, his voice cracking as he cried, "Help! She can't breathe!" The hospital staff swarmed around them, a well-oiled machine of efficiency. They gently lifted the woman from his back, laying her on a gurney. Questions were hurled at him: name, condition, relationship. But Ethan could only watch as they wheeled her away, the rhythmic beeping of the machines, a counterpoint to the frantic pounding of his heart. He leaned against the wall, his body shaking, his dress shirt plastered to his back with sweat. He glanced at the clock. 9:19 a.m. Game over. He found a bank of payphones down the corridor. The heavy receiver felt alien in his trembling hand. He dialed the number, the one he'd rehearsed a million times, the one that represented everything he desperately needed. Horizon Innovations, Human Resources, how may I direct your call? This is Ethan Powell. I have an interview scheduled for 9:30 with Miss Martinez. Mr. Powell. The receptionist's voice was polite, but resolute. I'm sorry, but Ms. Martinez has a very tight schedule today. The position has multiple candidates interviewing, and we can't accommodate rescheduling. I understand, Ethan said softly, the word a hollow echo in the sterile hallway. Understanding didn't pay the bills, didn't feed his daughter, didn't stop the eviction. He hung up, the click of the receiver, a definitive slam on the door of his future. He stood there, the borrowed tie chafing against his neck, the polished shoes pinching his toes, the weight of his daughter's future crushing him. The doctor found him 20 minutes later, his face etched with cautious optimism. The woman was stable. They'd administered medication, opened her airways. You saved her life, the doctor said, clapping him on the shoulder. Another few minutes, and we might have been looking at brain damage. You did a good thing. A good thing? Ethan echoed, the words laced with bitterness. Good things didn't keep the lights on. Good things didn't erase the fear in Abby's eyes. The bus ride home was a slow, agonizing crawl through the city he suddenly felt like a stranger in. He stared out the window, his reflection staring back. A man in rumpled clothes, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, who just traded his daughter's future for a stranger's breath. Why? The question hammered at him, relentless and unforgiving. Why had he stopped? He knew the answer. He'd seen the panic in her eyes, the same desperate fight for air he'd witnessed 3 years ago when Rachel, his wife, had died alone on a hiking trail. Her empty inhaler clutched in her hand. 15 minutes. The doctor had said it took less than 15 minutes. 15 minutes of terror. He couldn't stand by and watch it happen again, even if it meant sacrificing everything. He couldn't. The apartment felt smaller, colder than he remembered. The eviction notice, tucked away in the kitchen drawer, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. 15 days. 15 days to find a miracle. He sat at the kitchen table, the prepaid phone heavy in his hand. He needed to call the credit union, explain the situation, beg for an extension. But what could he say? That he'd missed a job interview to save a stranger? That his conscience was more valuable than his credit score? Before he could dial, the phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Powell, this is St. Mary's Elementary. Abby's teacher wanted me to call. There's a field trip permission slip that needs to be turned in by tomorrow. It's $25 for the Science Museum. His throat closed. I'll have to get back to you. He hung up, his head in his hands. He'd saved a life 2 weeks ago. Tonight, he couldn't even save his daughter from disappointment. 2 weeks bled into each other, a relentless march of missed calls, overdue bills, and Abby's heartbreaking silence. She'd stopped mentioning the museum. She'd stopped mentioning a lot of things. On the 14th day, at 4:30 p.m., a knock echoed through the small apartment. Ethan's heart lurched. The eviction was scheduled for tomorrow, but maybe the landlord had decided to expedite the process. Abby, stay in your room for a minute, he said, his voice tight. He opened the door, bracing himself for the worst. It wasn't the sheriff. It wasn't the landlord. It was a woman in an expensive beige suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. Ethan Powell? Yes. He tried to keep his voice steady, but a tremor betrayed his anxiety. My name is Claire Donovan. I've been looking for you for 2 weeks. She paused, her gaze unwavering. May I come in? I promise I'm not here about debts or evictions. Actually, I'm here about what happened on Harrison Street with the elderly woman having an asthma attack. Ethan's breath caught. Did something happen? Is she okay? She's fine, thanks to you. Claire's expression softened slightly. That woman was my mother. Your mother? He stepped aside numbly, letting her in. Claire sat on their worn couch, her designer suit a stark contrast to the threadbare furniture, but she didn't seem to notice or care, her focus entirely on Ethan. My mother, Eleanor Donovan, told me everything. How she'd forgotten her inhaler that morning, how her airways started closing on the sidewalk, how people stood around filming instead of helping. Her voice caught slightly. And how one man, you, picked her up and ran 3 blocks to the hospital. Anyone would have. No, they wouldn't have. They didn't. 30 people stood there watching my mother die, and only you acted. The doctor said 5 more minutes and she would have suffered permanent brain damage. 10 minutes and she would have died. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. It took me a week to find you. The hospital wouldn't release your information, and you'd left before my mother could get your name. I had to go through security footage from 3 different businesses, track down witnesses, piece together who you were. Why? Ethan asked quietly. Why go to all that trouble? Claire pulled out a piece of paper from the folder and handed it to him. It was a check, $50,000, Ethan's name on the pay line. Because you saved the most important person in my world. Ethan stared at the check, his mind reeling. I can't. This is too much. I can't accept this. Mr. Powell, Ethan, do you know what my mother means to me? My father died 5 years ago. She's all I have. I would have paid 10 times that to have her alive and well. But I didn't do it for money. I didn't even know who she was. That's exactly why you deserve this, Claire said. You helped her when there was nothing in it for you, when it cost you everything. She paused, seeming to gather herself for something more. When I was searching for you, I did a background check. I learned about your situation, your daughter, your late wife, your current circumstances, and I learned something particularly interesting. Ethan waited, his heart pounding. You had an interview scheduled that morning at 9:30 a.m. at Horizon Innovations. The words hit him like a physical blow. He nodded, unable to speak. Claire leaned forward slightly. Ethan, I'm the CEO of Horizon Innovations. The room seemed to tilt. Ethan gripped the arm of his chair, trying to process what she just said. But that means... It means you missed your interview at my company because you were saving my mother's life. The irony hasn't escaped me. You gave up a chance at a job with us to save someone you didn't even know was connected to that very opportunity. The universe has a twisted sense of humor or a perfect sense of timing, Claire countered. I looked at your application after I found out. You're overqualified for that coordinator position. Your experience, your background, you should be doing more than managing logistics. She pulled out another paper from her folder, which is why I'm offering you a different position. Director of Community Outreach. It's a new role I've been meaning to create. Someone to head our corporate responsibility initiatives. Work with local communities. Develop programs that actually make a difference. The salary is $90,000 a year. Full benefits, including comprehensive health coverage, and if you're interested, you can start Monday. Ethan couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. Why? He managed to ask. The check is already more than generous. Why the job too? Claire's expression grew thoughtful. Because when my mother was dying on that sidewalk, you didn't see a stranger. You saw a human being who needed help. That's the kind of person I want in my organization. That's the kind of values I want representing my company. Dad. Abby's small voice came from the hallway. Is everything okay? Ethan looked at Claire, who nodded encouragingly. Come here, sweetheart. Abby patted over in her socked feet, eyeing Claire curiously, but not fearfully. Even in worn clothes, his daughter had a dignity about her, a grace that reminded him painfully of Rachel. Abby, this is Ms. Donovan. She came to talk to me about a job. A job? Abby's eyes widened hopefully. Claire smiled warmly at the little girl. Your dad did something very brave 2 weeks ago. He saved someone's life, and now I'd like to offer him a position at my company, if that's okay with you. Abby looked between them, processing this with 8-year-old wisdom. Does this mean we can go to the museum? Yes, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. We can go to the museum and get new shoes. And he looked at the check in his hand, then at Clara's patient, kind face, and things are going to be okay. What would you do if your worst moment became your miracle? If the choice that seemed to destroy everything actually built something better? Claire stayed for another hour going over the details of the position, the benefits package, the start date. Abby sat beside her father, occasionally interjecting with questions that made Claire laugh. Real, genuine laughter that filled their small apartment with something it had been missing for too long. Hope, your daughter's brilliant, Claire said as she prepared to leave. The way she thinks, the questions she asks, she's special. She gets it from her mother, Ethan said softly. Claire paused at the door. I know this is a lot to process, and I know accepting help isn't easy. I can see it in your face, but Ethan, you've been carrying everything alone for too long. Let someone help carry the load. After she left, Ethan sat with Abby on the couch, holding the check that would solve their immediate problems and the job offer that would secure their future. Dad, are you crying? Abby asked, reaching up to touch his cheek. Happy tears, baby. These are happy tears. Because of the lady. Because of a lot of things. He pulled her close. Remember when I said everything was going to be okay? I was wrong. Everything's going to be better than okay. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Ethan slept without anxiety, clawing at his chest. The eviction notice no longer mattered. The credit union would be paid. Abby would have everything she needed and more. But beyond the financial relief, something else had shifted. The guilt he'd carried since Rachel's death, the weight of not being there, not being able to save her, had lifted slightly. He'd saved someone. When it mattered, when it cost him everything, he'd chosen to act. Maybe he couldn't save Rachel, but he'd saved Eleanor. And in the strange arithmetic of the universe that had saved him, too. 6 months later, Ethan stood in his office at Horizon Innovations, looking out at downtown Springfield. His life had transformed so completely that sometimes he had to pinch himself to believe it was real. The job was everything Claire had promised and more. He'd thrown himself into it with passion, developing programs that helped single parents find employment, creating partnerships with local schools, establishing emergency funds for families in crisis. Every initiative felt personal because he lived. He knew what it was like to be one paycheck from disaster, one emergency from ruin. Abby had bloomed like a flower, finally given sunlight, new clothes, new shoes, the museum trip she dreamed about. But more than that, she had stability, security. She could be a kid again instead of a tiny adult trying not to be a burden. They'd moved into a 3-bedroom apartment in a better school district. Abby had her own room decorated in the purple and silver she'd always wanted. She joined the art club, the science club, and had friends over for sleepovers, luxuries that had been impossible before. But the biggest change, the one Ethan hadn't expected, was Claire. She'd started dropping by his office to discuss the community programs, but their conversations gradually shifted from professional to personal. She'd ask about Abby's school projects, share stories about Eleanor's recovery, talk about the challenges of running a company so young. I inherited the company when I was 28. My father dropped dead of a heart attack in this very building. One day I was a marketing manager. The next I was CEO of a company with 800 employees. I've been faking confidence for 5 years. You're not faking anything, he'd replied. You're one of the most capable people I've ever met. So are you, she'd said softly. You just haven't had the chance to show it until now. Their first real date, if you could call it that, was at Abby's school play months after Ethan started at Horizon. Claire had mentioned wanting to see it, and Ethan had invited her without thinking. She'd shown up in jeans and a sweater instead of her usual suits, looking younger and more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. Abby had beamed when she saw Claire in the audience, waving enthusiastically from the stage before her teacher gently redirected her attention. After the play, Abby had dragged Claire around, introducing her to all her friends as my dad's boss, who's really nice and smells like flowers. Flowers? Claire had laughed. Really expensive flowers, Abby had clarified, seriously making Claire laugh even harder. Eleanor had started joining them for Sunday dinners once she'd fully recovered. The elderly woman was nothing like Ethan had expected. Sharp, funny, and endlessly grateful in a way that made him uncomfortable. You carried me 3 blocks, she'd say every time, shaking her head in amazement. In dress shoes. Do you know how uncomfortable that must have been? Mom, you've told that story 100 times, Claire would protest, and I'll tell it 100 more. This man saved my life. I'm allowed to be repetitive about it. Eleanor had taken to Abby immediately, teaching her card games, helping with homework, filling the grandmother role that had been empty since Rachel's parents had retreated into their grief. She's going to be trouble when she's older, Eleanor would say fondly, watching Abby negotiate for extra dessert. The good kind of trouble, the kind that changes things. Have you ever watched your life rebuild itself into something you never dared imagine? That's what those 6 months felt like for Ethan, like watching a photo develop slowly, revealing an image more beautiful than anything he could have planned. The relationship with Claire evolved naturally, without grand declarations or dramatic moments. She'd become part of their routine. Tuesday lunches, Thursday evening walks, weekend adventures with Abby. She fit into their life like she'd always belonged there, filling spaces Ethan hadn't even realized were empty. I'm falling in love with you, she'd said one evening, 6 months after that first meeting. They were on his apartment balcony while Abby slept inside, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. Claire, Ethan had started, but she'd pressed a finger to his lips. I know it's complicated. I'm your boss. You're still grieving, Rachel. We both have baggage. But Ethan, when I found you, I thought I was just repaying a debt. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to fall in love with your strength, your kindness, the way you are with Abby. I didn't expect to want to be part of your life. You already are, he'd said simply. You and Eleanor both. You're already family. They'd kiss then, soft and certain, like a promise of things to come. A year after that terrible, wonderful Tuesday morning, Ethan stood in his office looking at a framed photo on his desk. It was from Abby's 9th birthday party the week before. Her laughing with frosting on her nose, Claire hugging her from behind, Eleanor wearing a party hat at a jaunty angle, and Ethan watching them all with an expression of wonder he didn't remember making. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Dinner at Mom's tonight. She's making that lasagna you love. Abby already confirmed she's free. Smiley face, Ethan typed back. Our social secretary strikes again. 3 dots appeared. Then, I love you. See you at 6. Love you too. And he did. It was different from what he'd had with Rachel. Not better or worse, just different. Rachel had been young love, building something from nothing, dreams and plans and first times. Claire was mature love built on understanding and shared loss and second chances. Both were real. Both were gifts. That evening, as Ethan drove to Eleanor's house with Abby, chattering excitedly in the back seat about her science project, he thought about that morning a year ago. The morning he'd had 27 minutes to make his interview. The morning he'd chosen a stranger's life over his own future. Except it hadn't been over his future at all. It had been the path to it. If he'd made that interview, he'd probably have gotten the coordinator job. He'd be making decent money, living a decent life. He'd never have met Claire as anything more than a name on the company directory. Eleanor would have been a stranger who died on a sidewalk while people filmed. Instead, he'd run 3 blocks in uncomfortable dress shoes with a dying woman on his back. He'd missed his interview, faced eviction, nearly lost everything. And in losing everything, he'd gained more than he'd ever dreamed possible. A job that fulfilled him, a daughter that thrived, a woman who loved him, a mother figure who doted on Abby, a family rebuilt from the ashes of tragedy. Dad, Abby said from the front seat. Yeah, sweetheart. I'm glad you saved Eleanor that day. Me too. Even though you missed your interview. Ethan glanced at her, especially because I missed my interview. That doesn't make sense, she said with 8-year-old logic. Someday it will, he promised. Someday you'll understand that the worst moments of our lives can become the best things that ever happened to us, that losing one thing can mean finding something better, like how we lost Mom but found Claire and Eleanor. Ethan's throat tightened. Yeah, baby, exactly like that. I think Mom would like them, Abby said quietly. I think so too. They pulled up to Eleanor's house, a beautiful Victorian in the historic district with gardens that Claire attended on weekends. Through the windows, Ethan could see Eleanor and Claire in the kitchen laughing about something, their faces lit with warmth. This was his life now. This unlikely, impossible, beautiful life born from a moment of choice on a Tuesday morning when everything seemed lost. "Ready?" he asked Abby. "Ready?" she said, already unbuckling her seatbelt. They walked up the path together, father and daughter, toward the light and laughter waiting inside toward their family, toward home. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in second chances and the power of choosing humanity over opportunity, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the very thing we think is destroying our future is actually the key to a life we never dared to dream of. Sometimes running 3 blocks in dress shoes to save a stranger is exactly how you save yourself. Sometimes the interviews we miss are the ones we were never meant to make. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a plan far better than anything we could have written for ourselves. Eleanor opened the door before they could knock, pulling Abby into a hug. "There's my favorite artist. Come see what I bought for your project." Claire appeared behind her mother, meeting Ethan's eyes with that soft smile that still made his heart skip. "Hey," she said simply. "Hey," he replied. And in that single word was everything. Gratitude, love, the miracle of finding light after darkness. As he stepped into the house, into the warmth and chaos of this unexpected family, Ethan sent up a silent thank you to whatever force had put him on that sidewalk at that moment, to whatever twist of fate had made him choose humanity over opportunity. Because this messy, beautiful, impossible life, this was what he'd been running toward all along. He just hadn't known it until he'd carried a stranger 3 blocks to safety and lost everything that had been holding him back from everything he was meant to find. Friends, if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, if it reminded you of the power we all have to change someone's life with a simple act of kindness, please don't just watch and walk away. Hit that subscribe button and join our Everbell Stories family.